Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to the show, everybody! You know, we think of old Hollywood, right? We see the black and white photos, the glamour, the perfect smiles. But let me tell you, behind the scenes, it was nuts. It was absolutely wild. Golden Hollywood was glamorous, but behind the glam were explosive loves, betrayals, heartbreak today. We're diving into the top 5 Golden Age stars who cheated with their co-stars. And folks, number 3 is tragic. It's a tough one. It's like a movie within a movie, you know? The cameras are rolling, they're supposed to be acting, but the real drama is happening when the director yells cut. All right, kicking off our list at number 5 is a story straight from the golden age of Hollywood, featuring none other than its undisputed king, the one and only Clark Gable. Oh yeah, when you think of that era, his is the face that comes to mind. You see him on screen, he's got that irresistible smile, that confident swagger. He wasn't just a leading man, he was ultimate leading man, right? The studios didn't call him the King of Hollywood for nothing. That title was earned through sheer, unadulterated star power. In iconic movies like Gone with the Wind, he was charming, he was confident, he was the guy every woman wanted and every man wanted to be. His on-screen persona was the epitome of masculinity, but behind that carefully crafted image was a private life far more complex than his fans could ever imagine. At the time this story begins, Gable was married to his second wife, Maria Langham, a wealthy Texas socialite, 17 years his senior. She was known as Raya, and their marriage was, let's say, complicated. She had financed his career in the early days, but by the mid-30s, the passion had cooled, and they were reportedly living largely separate lives. This arrangement, however, was kept tightly under wraps. Meanwhile, he gets cast in The Call of the Wild, 1935. It was a big, rugged adventure film, a perfect vehicle for his persona. And who's his co-star? The incredibly beautiful, incredibly talented, and very devoutly Catholic, Loretta Young. She was a star in her own right, known for her grace and wholesome image, a stark contrast to Gable's roguish charm. You can already see where this is going, can't you? The classic Hollywood recipe for drama, a married man and a virtuous starlet. On screen, their chemistry was electric. It just popped. The tension between his rugged character and her refined one was palpable. But apparently, that chemistry didn't stop when the cameras did. Not by a long shot. The cast and crew were out on location in the middle of nowhere in Washington state. It was freezing cold, completely isolated from the glitz of Hollywood, and, well, things happened. They were stuck together for weeks, far from prying eyes. They started a secret affair, intense, passionate, and completely under the radar. According to Young's later accounts, the relationship wasn't entirely consensual at first, adding a much darker layer to the story. But it evolved into a clandestine romance. Imagine the immense pressure, keeping it from the studio, the ever-present press, and especially from Gable's powerful wife. A scandal of this magnitude could destroy both of their careers overnight. The real bombshell dropped after filming wrapped. Loretta Young suddenly disappeared from the public eye for a while, with her studio releasing a statement that she was suffering from exhaustion and needed to convalesce. But the truth was much, much bigger. She was pregnant. And the father? You guessed it. The married king of Hollywood, Clark Gable. This was a career-ending, life-shattering risk in the hyper-conservative 1930s, governed by the strict Hays Code. For a devout Catholic like Young, an out-of-wedlock child was unthinkable. So, with the help of her mother and the studio, they concocted an elaborate cover-up. After giving birth in secret, she placed her baby in an orphanage. Then, 19 months later, she publicly announced she was adopting a baby girl. That baby was, of course, her own daughter, Judy. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar, played out in real life. And this incredible secret stayed locked away for decades. Judy grew up believing she was adopted, even though her resemblance to Gable was so striking that she had to wear a bonnet in public to hide her ears, which were identical to his. Gable reportedly visited his daughter only once, briefly when she was a teenager. He never publicly or even privately to her acknowledged that he was her father. The King of Hollywood kept his crown, but at the cost of his own child. Coming in at number 4 is the original swashbuckler, the Tasmanian devil himself, Errol Flynn. Oh man, this guy. Where do you even begin? If Clark Gable was the undisputed King of Hollywood, Errol Flynn was the court jester who secretly wanted the throne. The rogue, the charming rake, the bad boy you couldn't help but love, even when you knew better. He exploded onto the scene from relative obscurity, a man whose real-life adventures as a prospector and sailor in New Guinea were almost as wild as the characters he'd soon play. He became an overnight sensation, headlining genre-defining classics like The Adventures of Robin Hood and Captain Blood. He was dashing, impossibly athletic, and had that mischievous glint in his eye that promised both adventure and trouble. He wasn't just acting, he was channeling a restless energy that was 100% authentic. He lived life at 100 miles per hour, with the throttle wide open and no brakes. Flynn's personal motto perfectly captured his philosophy. I intend to live the first half of my life. I don't care about the second. And he meant it. Treating his youth and good looks like a bank account he was determined to empty. His womanizing wasn't a rumor. It was an integral part of his public brand. He was married 3 times, but that was just the official record. The unofficial tally of his affairs is legendary and frankly, uncountable. On his film sets, it was practically expected that he'd romance his leading ladies. It was part of the Flynn package. He had legendary on-screen chemistry with Olivia de Havilland across 8 films, a pairing so electric that audiences assumed it continued off-screen. For her part, de Havilland always maintained they never went all the way, though she admitted to having a serious crush. Many others, however, did not share her restraint. For his studio, Warner Brothers, managing Flynn was a full-time job. They were constantly putting out fires, armed with contracts that had morality clauses no one could possibly enforce on a box office titan who was printing money for them. There were endless cover-ups, strategic payouts to disgruntled husbands or scorned lovers. Anything to keep the Flynn machine churning out hits and headlines. But eventually, the roguish charm masked something far darker and more sinister. In 1942, the fun stopped. Flynn stood trial for statutory rape, accused by 2 teenage girls in separate incidents. It was a massive, career-threatening scandal. The trial was a media circus, and it's where the phrase "in like Flynn" is said to have entered the American slang, meaning to succeed with women effortlessly, or more broadly, to get away with anything. Against all odds, he was acquitted, but the damage was done. He was forever tarnished. The charming swashbuckler image was now permanently shadowed by whispers of predatory patterns. The public couldn't unsee the ugly accusations, even with a not guilty verdict. He doubled down on his self-destructive lifestyle. The parties on his yacht, the Zaka, became legendary for their debauchery. It was a whirlwind of brawls, booze, and endless affairs. The hard living took its inevitable toll. The heavy drinking and drug use began to show on screen, bloating his features and slowing his movements. The once dashing hero aged decades in just a few years. The light in his eyes dimmed. He became a walking cautionary tale. Errol Flynn died of a massive heart attack at just 50 years old, his body ravaged by his lifestyle. His legacy is one of Hollywood's most complicated, a tangled web of undeniable brilliance and unforgivable scandal. On one hand, he is the definitive swashbuckler, a cinematic icon whose charm is still potent today. On the other, he left behind a messy, often ugly trail of personal choices. A man who truly did burn the candle at both ends until there was nothing left but smoke. Number 3, the tragic affair of Lana Turner. The sweater girl, the blonde bombshell, discovered at a soda shop, glamorous icon, but a turbulent, heartbreaking life. Married 8 times to 7 men. Relationships, passionate, intense, stormy. 1957, Johnny Stompanato enters. Not a leading man, a mob enforcer. Handsome, possessive, jealous, incredibly violent. On Another Time, Another Place with Sean Connery, Johnny flew to London, burst onto set, and threatened Connery with a gun. Connery grabbed the gun, twisted his wrist, had him kicked off. The abuse escalated. Beatings, threats, control. Lana was trapped and terrified. Her daughter Cheryl watched. Good Friday. A violent argument erupts. Lana tries to end it. He threatens to kill her, to ruin her face, to harm her family. Cheryl panics, grabs a knife, runs to defend her mother. As Johnny lunges, Cheryl steps between. In the chaos, she stabs him. He collapses and dies on Lana's bedroom floor. A media circus. Trial of the century vibes. She testifies, crying. Gut-wrenching and real. The court rules Cheryl's act justifiable. The scars lasted a lifetime. A profound tragedy born from a toxic, violent affair. Number 2, the brain and the body. All right, that last one was heavy. So let's shift gears from the shadows of politics to the dazzling, often deceptive, lights of old Hollywood. This next story is a classic tale of opposites attracting, a collision of intellect and image that captivated the world. First, you have Orson Welles, a true genius, a prodigy who seemed to spring into the world fully formed. He wrote, directed, and starred in Citizen Kane at the astonishing age of 25. He was a force of nature, an intellectual titan with a booming voice and an ego to match, known throughout Hollywood as the brilliant, if sometimes difficult, boy wonder. And then there was Rita Hayworth, dubbed the love goddess by a public that adored her. She was the embodiment of glamour. A stunningly beautiful and gifted dancer, she projected an intoxicating mix of vulnerability and raw sensuality on screen. She was the ultimate fantasy, carefully constructed by the studio system. They meet in the whirlwind of 40s Hollywood, a place of manufactured dreams. But Welles, ever the intellectual, prided himself on seeing what others didn't. He looked past the studio-polished image of the love goddess and saw Margarita Cancino, a sensitive, intelligent, and somewhat insecure woman longing to be seen for who she truly was. He pursued her not with empty flattery, but with his formidable charm and intellect, engaging her in conversations that went far beyond the Hollywood gossip. He was utterly captivated. He famously said, "If this is what it's like to be in love, I'm going to be in love the rest of my life." While she was separated from her first husband, they began a passionate, all-consuming affair. The press went absolutely wild, christening them with a headline that stuck, "The Brain and the Body." It was a label that both defined and, ultimately, may have doomed them. In a move that sent shockwaves through the industry, they eloped in 1943. The union of Hollywood's greatest mind and its most beautiful star was official. But Welles, the creator, couldn't resist trying to remold his new wife's image. For their film, The Lady from Shanghai, he famously had her cut her famed red hair and dye it blonde. The studio, Columbia, was absolutely furious. They had spent a fortune building the Rita Hayworth brand, and Welles dismantled it with a pair of scissors. He claimed he wanted to deconstruct the Gilda persona and show the real Rita. But perhaps it was more about showing his version of her, proving that she belonged to him, not the studio or the public. Their marriage was as passionate as it was tumultuous. Welles was a relentless workaholic and a serial cheater. He was a brilliant artist, but by all accounts, an incredibly difficult man to be married to. The initial intellectual and emotional bond they shared couldn't withstand the constant strain of his infidelity and his all-consuming obsession with work. Rita was often left alone, waiting for a man who was married first and foremost to his own genius. The inevitable finally happened. They separated and divorced in 1947, just 4 years after their whirlwind elopement. Rita later summed up the impossible dynamic with a heartbreakingly simple line. I can't take his genius anymore. They had a daughter together, Rebecca, a lasting link between them, but even that couldn't mend the fundamental fractures in their relationship. They simply couldn't make it work. It was a spectacular collision of two larger-than-life figures, a romance that burned incredibly bright and then faded just as quickly, leaving behind a legacy of classic cinema, a beautiful daughter, and a profound sense of heartbreak. And here we are, the #1 spot. The affair so big it was condemned by the Vatican. I am not kidding. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Epic, legendary, destructive. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a global event. The year, 1962. The place, Rome. The movie, Cleopatra. The most expensive film ever. Chaos everywhere. Elizabeth Taylor, massive star, two-time Oscar winner, married to Eddie Fisher. That marriage started in scandal. Eddie left Debbie Reynolds for Liz. Enter Richard Burton, brilliant Welsh stage actor, hard-drinking womanizer, married to Sybil Williams. From their first scene, the chemistry was undeniable, like a lit match in gasoline. The script called for a kiss. They kissed, and they didn't stop. It happened in front of everyone. The barely hidden affair became the biggest story in the world. Paparazzi everywhere, front pages day after day, the public obsessed and outraged. Both were married, both cheating, flagrantly, publicly. The Vatican condemned them in print. A congresswoman tried to bar their re-entry to the U.S. Eddie and Sybil, publicly humiliated. Production spiraled. Liz and Dick thrived on the storm. They divorced their spouses and married in 1964. And there you have it. Wow, what a list. 5 golden age scandals. Love, betrayal, tragedy behind the cameras. From secret children and mobster boyfriends to the affair that shook the world. Thanks for taking this trip back in time. Comment which scandal shocked you most. Lana's tragedy or Liz and Dick's epic firestorm. And don't forget to subscribe for more Hollywood deep dives. We'll see you in the next video.